Welcome to our weekly discussion, Moral Side of the News. I'm Shawn Kaelin with the WHAS Crusade for Children. As always, joined by a distinguished panel of, let's call them horse racing experts this week. Happy Derby 150 week. Father Joe Graffis with the Archdiocese of Louisville. Reverend Jason Crosby, Center College. Rabbi Stan Miles, Louisville Melton School. And Reverend Harriett Akins-Banman, New Albany Centenary United Methodist Church. Tensions in the Middle East remain high this week as we saw Israel strike back at Iran. Here's how ABC covered the story from Friday, April 19th.
New images just in after Israel has now retaliated after Iran's first ever direct attack on Israeli soil. Tonight here you will see the new satellite images of the damage inside Iran. And where does this go from here? ABC's Matt Gutman in Israel again tonight.
Tonight, Israel striking back inside Iran, retaliating for Tehran's first ever direct attack on Israel. The pinpoint strike happening shortly before dawn. Videos circulating online appearing to show explosions in the distance. A senior U.S. official telling ABC News Israeli fighter jets firing at least 3 missiles from outside Iranian airspace, destroying an air defense radar site that protects the Natanz nuclear facility in central Iran, but that nuclear facility not the intended target. New satellite images released today showing damage near this Iranian airbase. The strike meant to send a message to Tehran that Israel is capable of penetrating even Iran's most sensitive sites, analysts say.
We're not just going to go after the tentacles of the octopus, we're going to go after its head.
ABC News learning that Israel notified the U.S. shortly before its attack. Secretary of State Antony Blinken making it clear today the U.S. had nothing to do with the strike.
The United States has not been involved in any offensive operations. What we're focused on is our work to de-escalate tensions.
Iran also appearing to de-escalate, drawing a curtain of secrecy over the attack, saying there was no damage, no casualties, and blaming it on infiltrators, not directly pointing the finger at Israel. And Israel also projecting business as usual, with not a single official comment from the government or the military. But sources say the limited nature of Israel's response signaling an effort to avoid a wider war after weeks of escalating tensions. Israel's airstrike on Iran's consulate in Syria that killed some of its top commanders. And then Iran's response, that unprecedented barrage of 300 drones and missiles into Israel.
So what happens now? Do Israel and Iran not attack each other directly anymore?
I think this round is over. Both fighters are going to leave the ring, but they'll be back.
So panel, last week we discussed the first ever attack on Israel by Iran. And now this week, the strike back by Israel on Iran. We did not have a representative from the Jewish faith last week with us, so I felt it important to talk about it again in the back and forth. So here we are 2 weeks into this back and forth. And your thoughts?
It's been 6 months now since the 7th of October. My thoughts? I'm still in sort of a state of shock. I can remember the night of October 6th, my wife and I were in New York City, and we were at a really joyous service celebrating the end of our fall Thanksgiving festival, and it was the time that we end and begin reading the Torah, the Hebrew scroll containing the 5 books of Moses, and joy. And we were at Central Synagogue, which is one of the historic congregations in America, really. It's in the middle of New York City. And I mean, we were on a high. And the next morning, I went to another synagogue in the neighborhood where we were staying. A friend of mine is the rabbi, and this is the guy who was the head of our movement with our programming both as a denomination in the United States and in Israel. And I walked into the service, and he was really in a state of shock. And the more we learned on the 7th of October, the greater the shock. And I gotta tell you, the shock hasn't abated because there are still hostages. And some of the hostages are children.
Right.
And my heart goes out to all of the hostages, all of the innocents in Gaza. When I hear the numbers, I find the numbers to be astounding. 30,000 or something?
35.
But I'm disturbed because the numbers are coming from one place. The numbers are coming from a part of the government in Gaza controlled by Hamas. But that being said, the death of one innocent is a crime. Numbers don't, as long as innocents are being killed, something has to be done about it. I'm optimistic, though. I think that there will be a light at the end of the tunnel, and I also feel with all my heart. I'm a student of history, and I'm not just a student of Jewish history. I'm a student of history, and I think about not Israel and Gaza. I think about Ireland. And I think about the troubles in Ireland. And if that situation can be resolved, then this situation can be resolved. You know, it's not Jews and Palestinians, it's not Jews and Arabs, it's not Israelis and Arabs. The problem at its root is the sin of fanaticism.
Right.
And you know something? I don't know any religious group, I don't know any human group that is immune from this sin.
Amen. I mean, I think in going back to the Iran-Israel thing, the more current thing, I'm grateful that it did not escalate. And it certainly looked like it could. So I'm grateful that, I mean, even what Iran did to Israel was, they warned everybody ahead of time, so we shut down all these kind of things, thank God, because there could have been a lot of damage. It's like they knew that. And then Israel kind of retaliates, but in a less extreme way. Praise God that saner voices are doing that, but it's still a tinderbox. And how do we resolve this? It's been, you know, the tit for tat, revenge. You know, I just find in the scriptures that revenge doesn't solve problems. Revenge only deepens the problems, and yet there's such a long history. You killed my grandfather, I'm going to kill your grandfather, and whatever it is, our child, or all that kind of stuff. It is so sad, and you know, whatever the numbers are in Gaza is just astronomical. I mean, when you think, how many did we lose in Vietnam? 55, 56,000, and that's devastating to us. That was over years, and yet this has not even been 7 months. And food and all the supplies that need to go in. I mean, on both sides. I mean, Hamas is obviously fanatical, to use Stan's word, but some of the response has not always been healthy either, but it is very, very, very complicated. Unfortunately, innocent people get caught in the crossfire of all this, and every time I've been to Israel, you know, you can see there's extremes on both sides, and they hate each other. It's like there's so many people in the middle. Can we just get along? You know, it is so sad. But I don't know how to resolve it. But maybe, as Stan said, saner voices will occur.
I hope those saner voices arise before the boxers go back into the ring. Thinking about the story that we just heard, you know, they're posturing and they're dancing around and throwing some jabs at one another. But think, oh my God, what happens when we're not, or the country is not as prepared to shoot down the drones, and what happens when more innocents, and how. And in the bigger picture, how do these places get through this layer upon layer of grief and loss of life and hope, especially regarding the children and those young lives? It's overwhelming for me to think about.
And even kind of come up with a two-state solution, which seems to be at least the right way to go, but then who's going to be in charge of that? And all the devastation, and what is 80% of the buildings in Gaza have been destroyed. I mean, the amount of, for 1.2 million people in that area, that rebuilding is going to be enormous,
And the injustice of them living among the rubble.
Right.
And how is that life? And how does humanitarian aid really, that goes through, how does it really get to those in greatest need?
Well, I just want to affirm everything that everyone has said thus far, and just add one additional comment, not so much reflecting on what has happened, but in an attempt to look forward, with the initial statement that it is terribly complex to resolve these issues, and we've touched upon some of the complexities that will have to be dealt with to reach an enduring and lasting peace. But I do think acknowledging this dimension of this particular issue, but it's not confined to what's happening with Israel and Gaza and Iran. I see this same dynamic unfolding all around the globe, and that is the ability of some of the fanatic groups, Stan, that you referenced, perhaps with the backing of a state, but operating as a proxy and removed from a state actor to sow seeds of such terror and destruction. We've seen it now consistently in the modern era, I think, but I think that type of combativeness, where you have certain individuals, whatever the side may be, that are able to function and operate in the shadows, be it Hamas or another group supported by Iran, or groups that might be supported by the United States or Israel, whatever it may be. When there's that degree of removal, and we're not necessarily able to put our finger on who it is that is behind the animating violence, supporting and funding it, it makes it so difficult. And I see that as a new layer that we are dealing with in the modern realm. I think we talk a lot about the way in which that a similar dynamic plays itself out with misinformation online. Who is really behind this? And I think it does speak to the fact that in the modern world, given weaponry that's available, given the ability to sow seeds of destruction that have physical implications, psychological implications, that there are some rogue actors that are really hard to curtail, that can really exacerbate so much of what we're dealing with. I don't have an answer to that. But I see that as a recurring theme that arises in so many conversations that we have about violence or online misinformation and in other spheres of life. And I'm not sure what to do with it, but I think it's a significant component of what we're dealing with as global citizens in this day and age.
And one of the things I think we're going to get to this topic in a little bit was is what's happening in our country in terms of people being pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli, and the hatred, I mean, the anti-Semitism, xenophobia, whatever you want to call it, that's happening in our own country. I mean, I think people have a right to protest, but not to be hateful to other people, because it's not all Jews that are killing a lot of people in Gaza, and it's obviously not all Arabs that are killing Jews, and we get that all mixed up sometimes. And you know, how do we get along here? Being able to say, well, I'm really concerned about this, and I'm really concerned about this. We need to be concerned about both sides, as Stan has already said, that the people innocent are caught in the middle of all of this, as they've been for years.
And we can certainly move on to that topic right now. Rebecca, we're not going to play the video I had set up, so we can give you guys more time to talk about it at least. But yes, the lead story on all the national news all week this week has been the campus protest going on, and our country's reaction to the war in Gaza and the injustices that they see. Now, are outsiders infiltrating it, or is it being led by students? You know, that's the question to be had. But your thoughts on that and what's happening in our own country, as Father Joe just alluded to?
Free speech is a blessing that needs to be nurtured. But when free speech happens and there are people walking around with a head covering, like I'm wearing, and at a university they're assaulted, spat upon, cursed out, that's not the exercise of free speech at all. The problem is that some of us wear obvious head coverings, obvious clothing items that make us targets. And this is a target. Also, a keffiyeh is a target. And people are attacked because they wear a keffiyeh or a hijab. At some of the great universities in America. And the administrators of some of those universities, or the people who were the administrators of some, I cannot believe how utterly and completely clueless they are. Because to try to figure out a way to say that the Holocaust might have been okay as a free speech issue, maybe Jews don't have a right to live. That's right up there with screaming fire in a crowded theater. It's not free speech. It's wild, impulsive, and hurtful speech.
Well, this is certainly a topic that has been front and center for me as one who spends a good deal of my time on a college campus working with Israeli students, Jews, Muslim students, students on various sides of and perspectives when it comes to what's happening in Israel and Gaza. I can't speak for what has been happening on other campuses across the country. I do know that there have been conversations regarding free speech, the extent of free speech in the academy, at a place like Center College or any other campus in the Commonwealth or across the country for that matter. What are the bounds of free speech? I will say that one thing I have learned in my time on a college campus in recent years is that 18 to 22-year-olds are exploring the bounds of what free speech entails and the consequences of what happens when lines are crossed. They're exploring the bounds of what effective protest entails and when protest begins to be self-destructive. You're not able to advance the agenda that you wish because the means that you're implementing are not effective. I will also say that at a place like Center, and I think the vast majority of campuses across the country, while these issues are arising, we're not seeing what has happened in New York or at UT Austin or in Los Angeles. But I don't know what all contributes to the fact that that's not happening where I am most days. What I will say that I think is an important factor, and it comes back to a theme that we've talked about today, is that a place like Center, it's very difficult to operate unconnected from the rest of the campus community. And so while you do have people with different perspectives, the community is small enough and relationships are in place so that you're going to continue to see someone with whom you might disagree the next morning at breakfast. That makes, I think, a significant difference in terms of how these issues are handled in a campus community of that nature. Again, I don't know exactly what all is happening at Columbia. I got my hands full here at Danville, Kentucky. But I do know the fact that yes, if you do have some students that are getting to a point whereby their free speech might be encroaching upon what others might then perceive as hate speech, rather than that exploding into something that might require calling in the police department or the National Guard in a community like that. And I hope and I think that on a lot of campuses, we're then able to stop and say, do you know what the implications might be for your friend who might see the world differently from you? Let's use this as a moment of growth. Let's use this as a moment of conversation. We're not saying that you can't hold this perspective at this point in time, but if you say this, if you do this, what are the implications for it? Can we have a conversation with someone with whom you might disagree? Can we learn together about the current moment? What's happening in Israel and Gaza? What's the historical context for it? Can we learn together as you're sharing your perspectives and feelings? So I think that ideally, it can be an opportunity that affords incredible opportunity for growth, so that as a society where we're dealing with these fractures where there's community breakdown and the inability to have conversation, can we use the protests and these feelings to learn, to grow, to strengthen our community? I know where I am. It's a struggle, but that's the direction that we're trying to go. I also know in other contexts how quickly it can disintegrate, and we've seen it this past week.
I mean, I think one of the interesting things, and I was a campus minister a long time ago at Bellarmine, and I always said the difference between a freshman and a senior was 10 years in terms of life experience, because I would deal with seniors saying, oh, these freshmen are crazy. But I said, you were one not that long ago. But I think, protests are one thing, but to say, to get hatred out of this is exactly what we're seeing in the middle of this problem. Academic communities should say, okay, how can we talk about these issues civilly, and how can we maybe come up with some positive solutions both here and there? And that's what an academic institution should be about. But hate speech, and I was around in the 60s when there was a lot of protests, and I was a part of those protests. But I don't remember a lot of hate. I remember sometimes being hatred shown to some soldiers, which I thought was terribly out of place. But our veterans and stuff like that. But hate has no place here, you know, even though you disagree with people.
You mentioned several times, Jason, the classroom atmosphere that the protest has placed our country in at all these different universities. It also is an opportunity to, I would hope at some level, and I'm not sure how this is fostered, but for the individuals involved in these activities to take a step back and to have the space and mentoring to be asked, what leads you to this place of hate?
Yes.
What leads you to this place of misunderstanding of the person you were sitting beside in class that you didn't have a problem with, and suddenly you have a problem with now because of this world event? And how might we process that in a way that we come out as a better human being on the other side?
You've got to look ideally at every person as a being created in the image and likeness of God.
Amen, brother.
And if you do that, you can disagree with them on points, but you're going to disagree with them. That doesn't mean you're going to insult them, and that certainly doesn't mean you're going to assault them.
Absolutely. And just let me compliment what you just said and affirm everything that you just said, Stan, and add, we do need space like higher education, the academy, whereby these very messy and complicated conversations can take place. I think that it is important that there's room for that societally, for this to happen, and it will be messy. It has been through the generations and through the decades, and a continued challenge for everyone involved, and certainly people approaching that kind of messiness through a religious lens is exactly what you said, is remember the inherent humanity and value of each individual. Let's start there and see where the conversations can lead us and how we can grow from there.
Very good discussion. It's Derby week. Hate to make a hard transition right into fun here. Right? We don't want to get...
Oh boy.
But they were the pre-show for this show was excellent. They're excellent handicappers. So, Derby picks. We have about 30 seconds left. We'll go around the table.
Well, I think Jason has come up with being the expert here, so I don't know. But
Country House was good to me a couple years ago. I'll just share that. And so therefore, West Saratoga will be in a box of some sort that I put together this year, whose trainer is Bahamian. It'll be a long shot. I'll have some others involved. But West Saratoga will be in the mix.
I prefer a horse.
We got about 10 seconds left.
I'm going to probably be for Sierra Leone. I like the name best, and I like the way he ran. But Fierceness looks awfully good, too. But usually it's an outsider. So.
Just steal because it's a gray.
Very good. There you go. Put those in a trifecta box. Have a good week.